deep dish is, I think, a good one to start the year. It's a good feel-good story. It's a New York Times article that came out on January 7th, about 5 days ago. I think most everybody knows, even if you don't watch Sparks.
Sports. Awesome.
We'll edit that. I'm sure.
Amazing.
It'll edit that. So Damar Hamlin. Most of us know who Damar Hamlin is by now, even if you don't watch football. He was the one that was hit in the chest, and after like a couple seconds, he just falls over. Everyone's like freaking out, what's going on? And so this article was really about the response, the huge response that we got of prayer, and it was just awesome to see immediately. I mean, people praying. If you guys were you guys watching, by the way? Were you watching the game when it happened, or how did you hear about it?
I actually wasn't.
We were watching it.
Okay.
I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Because when I say I'm watching, I'm just on the couch and it's on the TV and I'm doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
But
she's knitting.
Michael, knitting, LOL. Michael noticed, and so that anyways, we were watching it real time as it was happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I got sent it from
you
Mike.
Yes. Michael texted you.
Yeah, he texted me.
Did you hear about it?
I still don't know anything about it.
Oh my gosh.
No one contacted you.
Nobody.
Okay.
Wow.
We're not a big sports ball.
Yeah.
He calls it
you don't
Sparks.
have to be to really enjoy this article.
Sparks.
So Damar,
He calls it Sparks.
he falls over and he's having, what was it? He had it wasn't a heart attack, but it was
cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
cardiac
There's a
arrest.
scientific name
Basically
for it, but
heart attack.
Yeah.
Starts with the M.
And I think what was so gripping is you just see a lot of those guys who are out there, and they're freaking at the moment.
Big
they're
men
stressed
just
out. They're
literally
crying.
sobbing. Yeah.
Yeah, and within probably minutes, you start seeing guys gathering together to pray.
Mm-hmm.
And if you watch a lot of football, it's not unusual. Before the game, you'll see players from both sides will get together to pray. If you've grown up in sports, you've been probably have heard of or been a part of a different Christian groups that are part of sporting programs and everything else. But this article I thought was really good. Let me just read the opening paragraph. This is by the New York Times 5 days ago on January the 7th. Basically, the title of it says, "Prayers for Damar Hamlin should bond us between our show." I'm sorry. There we go. I can't read. Show a bond between football and faith. And she said, as the ambulance carrying the injured Buffalo Bills player Damar Hamlin rolled slowly off the field in Cincinnati Monday night, a huddle of players and team staff knelt in massive yet ultimate circle on the field. They bowed their heads, some placing hands on each other's shoulders and others with tears streaming down their faces. In a moment of spontaneous prayer led by the team's chaplain, Len Vanden Bros, I guess that's how you say it, B-R-O-S.
Not Bros, but Bose.
Bose. Oh, yeah, Bose. Thank you. The hush crowd at Paycor Stadium burst into applause as the players knelt and again rose after praying. It was the first of many prayers, an extraordinary display of public piety that unfurled across the country in the hours and days afterwards. It was just a powerful moment. I know that the very next morning I turned on ESPN. I was like, oh, they're going to be talking about this. I wonder how he's doing. And if you watch ESPN, Dan Orlovsky, he's one of the commentators on the show. I turned it on, and within minutes, he just said, "You know what? I don't know how my bosses are going to feel about this, but I'm just going to open us in a time of prayer." Mm-hmm. And he literally just prayed and prayed in the name of Jesus and prayed over Damar, and it was just really beautiful. And it got me thinking, wow, it's moments like these that are beautiful and just remind us what we have in common. It brings a lot of unity. There are moments like that in history. You guys were young, but you probably remember 9/11 and how unified we felt as a country. And this was another moment where at least I felt that way. And but it just got me thinking, one, why does it take circumstances like this? What was scary in the moment? Now we know it's a pretty beautiful story. God answered a lot of prayer, but why do you think it takes circumstances like this to bring people together? Well,
I think it breaks us down into the most intimate way. Like, we are helpless to be able to help Damar in that moment, mm-hmm. and we literally can't do anything to help him. And And so our natural inclination is to pray, or in most things it's thoughts and prayers towards Damar, and hopefully, and I'm speaking from a non-Christian perspective here, that somehow he gets better. Mm-hmm. So I think in the moments of just feeling helplessness is the moments that bring us together, because that is something that you can relate with someone really easily with, especially if you're there in the moment, seeing that happen, how like traumatic that is. Yeah. Then you instantly connect with someone else, and they know how you felt because they felt pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. My dad and I, we like watching sports. We'll text each other during games, but over the past like year and a half, 2 years, my dad has not watched an NFL game. Previously, many of probably the same players, they made a different stand. Instead of praying, they were kneeling for something else. And for some of the older generation, or for some people, they found that divisive, and some of them stopped watching football. So for a period of time, my dad stopped watching the NFL games because of that. He saw that as disrespectful to the flag, or disrespectful to the nation. But yet recently we started watching these games together, and he's been in the hospital for the last 6 weeks. He's been battling pneumonia, and so it's been a good reason for us to text back and forth and to be doing something together when I'm not there with him. And so he immediately just said, "Are you watching what's happening on the game?" Because it was in the first quarter, near the beginning of the game. And I thought, that's pretty cool. A year ago, my dad wasn't watching because he wasn't in agreement with what some of the players were doing. But here we have a crisis moment. And it made me think about life. When we were missionaries overseas, we served with other denominations, different people. And when you are low on resources, or when you feel like you might be alone or in a crisis moment, you tend to overlook what might divide us, or what our differences might be. And so, but we live in a season of comfort. I mean, we've lived in probably some of the best seasons of our nation, the history of our nation. And in the history of the world, our nation is probably the most powerful, richest nation in the history of mankind. And so I just feel like we're in a season where things are so comfortable that it just emphasizes what makes us different. And we've gotten real negative, but it was just a great reminder of what we have in common. One, we're all going to die. Two, someone as athletic and healthy as Damar can fall to the same thing that any of us can. We can fall over dead in a moment. And you said it, in those moments, all we have to turn to is God. And we find even people who don't pray probably found themselves praying in that moment, and which is just a whole other, interesting topic in itself. But I think in moments of my life when I felt like I was alone, or when we were in moments where we had a huge task before us, it's easy to find unity with other people. And it was refreshing. We may be very different. Our faiths may be different, or we may have a different brand of Christianity, but we can all come together and pray and lift somebody up. And so it was encouraging to see.
I was going to say, and it kind of goes along with what you were saying, but, I was thinking about September 11th and something like this, and there's been other things, but, you posed the question, what does it say about us? Well, I mean, to me, it kind of says that, like you said, we're used to just being ourselves and being kind of selfish, right? Mm-hmm. And if things don't impact us, then we don't really care, and, we saw these people gathering in the fields. I've seen the pictures, and all that kind of stuff, and I've heard enough about it, that's like, okay, September 11th was kind of that way, all these people that jumped in and helped out, but where are they the rest of the time? Mm-hmm. Where's the prayers the rest of the time? Where's the jumping in and helping your fellow man the rest of the time? Yeah. And it just kind of falters off. I mean, we went through a good season after September 11th where that spirit was about the United States and all that kind of stuff, but it's gone. Yeah. I mean, it's completely gone now. Yeah. So, there are people, and I'm not trying to discredit or take anything away from Damar's story at all, but it's like there are people that are suffering, there are people that are having these kinds of things happen constantly, and where's the crowd of people stopping as a nation, as an entire stadium to pray for them, and it's just not happening. You know?
to argue against that point is that you literally had 50,000 people at that game witness
Watching,
the same thing.
yeah.
And a lot of people don't see that happen.
Right.
And so that's why I think this is such a drastic different scenario than what you're talking about. Yes, there needs to be this is where the church needs to stand in and do a lot of stuff for the people that are suffering that aren't in the public scene. But I think the reason why it's gotten such a big response is because of that reason. You had people in person seeing this happen, but also the millions of people watching on TV that just happened
Right.
and don't know what happened. And it was just a confusion and not know what was going on. And if he was actually passed away, we just didn't know. And so that kind of leads what you're saying, all these questions that people, and you feel like the weight of, I'm going to die at some point. I could suffer just as much as Damar is right now, just in a moment. And life is just fleeting. And I think a lot of people had that feeling at that moment during that time.
It's a good reminder, too, that beautiful things and good things can come out of seasons of crisis and in hardship. I think human nature is we pray for comfort, we pray for good things, and as humans, we gravitate towards that. We want to be comfortable. We want things to go easy. Sometimes we question God when things are hard, but the reality is a lot of good things come out of hardship and pain. As I alluded to, my dad's been in the hospital fighting for his life for 6 weeks. It has easily been the hardest season of my life. Crying with my dad, who never cried. My sister said the other day, I've only seen him cry one time in my life. And here we are weeping together, knowing that his life's coming to an end really soon. But there's been so much beauty in this moment. And I wouldn't take away any of it for some of the things that I've heard come out of his mouth that have just been encouraging, that have been powerful. And it made me think about the church. I mean, most of the New Testament, when Paul was writing letters, was to a divided people, to problems in the church. What united them was Christ, and sometimes even the affliction that they were going through, being persecuted. So there were moments where they were united, but there were a lot of moments of division, and therefore he had to emphasize being united. There were prayers. Jesus prayed for unity among the believers. And so I just think it's our human nature. We're selfish. We gravitate towards comfort. We gravitate towards ease. But God allows difficult things for a reason, because it takes our eyes off ourselves and onto Him, onto others. And a great example of that right there. So, but here's a question that comes to my mind. As we've been praying for my dad and we're not seeing the answers that we're wanting in our church, we got to see literally a miracle in Kevin Tibbs. I just remember his wife posting about him, and it was looking like for a day or so that he was going to die. It was just going in for surgery, something not that big of a deal. Complication, and within, I think, a few days, right, he miraculously comes out of that and walks out of the hospital. And they came to our church and kind of shared that experience, and we all worshiped God. And I wasn't angry about it. I was encouraged. My dad was encouraged, but I also knew in my heart my dad may not get that same answer. And that's a good question, because a lot of people may have been observing and even praying for Damar and having a loved one that has passed away, or a loved one that is in the process of passing away. And so, what do you say? What do you say to somebody who's like, well, why God, it looks like God answered that prayer. Why didn't He answer my prayer? Yeah. Or did God really answer that prayer? Because it seems pretty random, He answers this prayer, but not this prayer.
Well, it's that age-old question: if God exists, why do bad things happen?
Yeah.
I mean, it just is. And, when I was in my early 30s, my mom died in a car accident, right? And so what a traumatic thing to deal with when you're in your 30s. I mean, you expect at some point in your life you're going to lose your parents. You don't expect it to happen when you're 30. And it's very traumatic. And it was a terrible season in my life. But, in the now 13 years later, whatever it is, it's 14 years later, God has used that so many times over and over again in my life to help me help others. And it's whether they're believers or not believers, but it's kind of like God didn't save her from that accident. And, I could just be angry at God. I could be like, whoa, how come this didn't happen? Other people, their families get in accidents and they live. And it's like, no, there's no point in that. But God has used that. And I've been able to see the tangible evidence of God using what happened in my life, that terrible thing, right? That, if God loved me, this wouldn't happen. But he's used it for so much good. Yeah. And that's the thing, is not everybody's story is the same. And God's going to use the story. And that may sound completely unfair to us, but it's not about us. It's about God. It's about what he wants. And so, because it's about people's eternity. And so that's kind of my answer, is like, not every story ends the same. Not every story is the same. Sometimes things are going to happen, but there's a purpose. And as cliche as it sounds, there's a plan for it. There's a reason for it. And it's going to be fine. God's going to work it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think we live our lives as like they're our own. And that's just not the case. At the end of the day, we don't own our lives.
Yeah.
And it is painful. Like I have a good friend who lost her dad in a very similar way to Kevin and Natalie's story. And she did lose her dad. And so her response was just, this is going to be very difficult for me to go through, when hearing about, like you're saying, other people's stories where this person pulled through and God ended up saving their life in that way. But she knows that pain is still there. And I think she knows that at some point it's always going to be there, and it comes around at a certain time of season. But she reaches out to her believing friends and just asks for prayer, and just asks for them to, be gentle to her if she is not who she always is just during that time. And so I think you can live with a scar maybe for your whole life, but the pain is gone. Yeah. And so I think we just have to remember, truly our lives they're not our own. And so every day really is such a miracle and so special. And it is really difficult when, we've even had friends who have lost their babies, and family members who have lost their babies, but, throw a baby shower 2 weeks later for their friend. And so going through those situations is not easy, and it's not fair. But again, that's that thing your mom and dad teach you when you're like 3, life's not fair, and it really isn't, but it's because we aren't in control of our lives, and they're not ours to keep. Yeah.
And I think even serving at a church like the size of First Baptist Rogers, and seeing that when you are ministering or you're actively involved in church like this, you see these stories, conflicting stories too, and miracles over here, and what seems like a lack of response from God over here. He didn't answer that prayer in the same way, that sort of thing. I remember having someone ask me about the passage in Matthew 7, and I'll read it here in a second, but he was struggling with something in his life. He was praying for something in his life, almost like how Paul was praying for that thorn to be removed, and God didn't remove it, but he was praying for something really personal. And he said, Alan, God's clearly not answering this prayer, and I don't understand why. And he showed me this verse, or these verses in Matthew 7, and you guys will recognize it. It says, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds. To the one who knocks, the door will be open. Who among you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? And so his question to me was, Alan, I'm asking sincerely. I'm humbling myself before the Lord. Why isn't God answering this prayer? And those are hard, those are hard to answer. And sometimes even a good biblical answer isn't going to always be satisfactory for somebody. But the reality is that God does hear our prayers. He hears every one of our prayers. But he doesn't always answer them the same way, just like a parent won't answer something the same way every time. He can answer yes. Yes, I will give you what you request. And sometimes it's no. And that's hard. That's hard to hear, especially when it feels good. I remember my dad, when he was praying for his own father who was crippled. My grandfather had a stroke and was crippled on one side. I remember my dad saying when I was a kid to me, he was just talking about it. He goes, even to this day, my dad's a man of faith. He says, even to this day, I don't understand why God allowed my dad to become crippled. He was such a good man. He was a deacon. He was a leader in his church. He was so active and did so many good things. Why would God do that? And he was really sincere. He wasn't giving me any answers. He just threw it out there. He was somewhat angry and confused. But I think as you live life, you just realize, just like a parent doesn't always say yes, God doesn't always say yes. He sees the big picture. Sometimes it's wait, and it's just not today. And we don't understand why. Just like Paul, he prayed 3 times for that thorn, whatever. We don't know what that thorn was to be removed. Some people think it was blindness or something like that, an ailment. Other people think that maybe it was a sin area in his life that he struggled with. We really don't know what it was. But he prayed about it, and it wasn't removed. And so I think it's just one of those things where we have to trust in God's goodness, that he understands, he knows the big picture. And there's, wonderful examples of people that do just that, that we need to look for in life.
Yeah, and I find it interesting going through Job right now through just a reading plan.
Such a happy book.
It's such a happy book. It's very relatable to the situation, like you're saying, with people that experience answer prayers and people that don't, in the way that they're asking. It's an important way for us to, it's how we respond to others that are in the situation as well. Like you look at Job's friends. Theologically, a lot of the stuff they say are correct, but in that moment, they were wrong in how they reacted and how they responded to Job's pain. And like one thing I read was the fact that Job's friend said, your guilt deserves way more. The response to your guilt, in his opinion, Job was in the wrong. But we know that God saw him as a right man. But the idea that, you're blaming this situation on that person, which is not what us as Christians should do, ever, or a person, like a decent person shouldn't blame this stuff happening on someone's sin or whatever. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to see all of this stuff is just to see God's grace through a lot of this. Yeah. Yes, we don't deserve what we get. We don't deserve the comfort that we have. We don't deserve the breath that we are breathing right now. And the fact that God gives us his grace and mercy, and it's just a reminder to us that, even in our life is fleeting in that moment, his reminder that God has given us everything that we have, and we don't deserve it, but God is gracious to give. And just thinking about prayer, this is not an argument about whose prayers are heard and whose are not. It's just a moment that everybody who is praying gets to experience God's common grace, God's grace in that moment. And we pray and hope that they see that as God's grace, not just I did this in my own power because I sent thoughts and vibes to whoever's in pain. We just pray that people will see God's grace through all of this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. That's a great word.
I was just going to follow up on the conversation about Paul praying for the thorn to be removed. God did answer him and just said, my grace is sufficient for you. And my power is made perfect in your weakness. And so sometimes that is the answer, and it's not the answer we want. But again, we write from a human perspective, and we can only see a tiny, tiny sliver of the big picture. And so if we wrote our own stories, they would be terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so,
for real.
There's a song we sing every once in a while that has kind of hit me a few times in moments of my life. And I don't remember the name of it, but it's where it says, he gives and takes away. He gives and takes away. My heart will truly say, blessed be your name. Yeah, blessed be the name of the Lord. Yeah, and it's really true. I mean, God does give and he takes away. But if we truly trust in him, then we can trust in the fact that it is either for our good or for the greater good, or that God has a purpose in it, even though he doesn't cause all things to happen. I mean, sometimes our sin, evil in this world, whatever it is, can cause bad things to happen, but God can take anything, any evil act, and he can do something good out of that. And sometimes it's a choice. It's a choice for us, and that's not always easy to hear, but it's beautiful to see people react when they easily could react into anger and bitterness towards God or others, and they respond in faith. And I can think of so many examples in our church right now of where that's happened. And I always pray, Lord, help me to be full of faith during moments of crisis. Help me to honor you in those moments, not easy to do. And my dad said it the other day. He remembered a friend who was in the same position he's in right now. The guy was on his deathbed, and he said, this is a guy that my dad worked with for years. And he was telling me about this the other day, that it stuck with him. He just says, I want my 3 sons to see me die as a man and die with faith. And my dad, he illustrated that about a month ago when we thought he was about to die. Before he went on the ventilator, he called every one of his grandkids, talked to every one of his kids. And his last words before they wheeled him out was, he pointed to my mom and says, "That's my girl," and left. And it was just like the coolest, most manliest way to say goodbye. I was like so proud of my dad in the moment. And we've had him for the next 6 weeks, but literally within the next week or so, we're going to be saying goodbye to him for real. And my dad was telling me about that. I'm like, Dad, you've already died like a man a few weeks ago for all of us to see. And when God's time for you to go again, you'll have that same opportunity, and I know you'll take it. And so beautiful things can happen in moments that are difficult, and it's beautiful. So embrace those moments, trust in God. Ask God the tough questions. Ashley and I call them the rated R questions. Ask God the tough questions. He's more than capable of responding and hearing those questions that we have, even in those moments where we doubt or lack faith. So
and just a final thought is that the other article that you sent us was from I think Christian Today or Christian, I forget what Time or whatever. Yeah. One of the sections was talking about we can pray, but in the prayer comes action after the prayer. Like, how are you going to follow through in faith? That, like when in James talking about faith without works is dead. I think that the saying could be prayer without works is dead. Yeah. How are you going to respond to that? And most of the time it's just steps of faith, not necessarily specific tangible things. Like we've seen a lot of things in Damar's story of like donating to his charity and stuff like that. But more or less is in our own personal situations and times of traumatic experiences, how are we going to walk in faith after and not just our traumatic experiences should lead us to more faith and not just the same faith that we had before.